The thing I'll remember about Val Kilmer on screen is just how cool he was. I mean, it's no surprise that one of his most famous roles was Iceman in Top Gun, because he did often have that kind of icy, cool demeanor as a leading man. Actually, I think some of his smaller roles, almost cameo roles in films, were possibly more interesting than his leading roles. But he certainly always seemed very suave, very cool, the kind of guy you think, yeah, I'd love to be like that. Top Gun is still a huge thing now, obviously because of the sequel as well. It's even more fresh in our memories. But there aren't many people who've played Batman. He was one of them. It might not be the best Batman movie, but he was chosen as a Batman. Actually, I thought he was relatively good as Batman, and as a leading man in lots of things in that era, in the 90s and into the noughties. But I actually think you look at something like Tombstone, the Western, where he played Doc Holliday, drunk. Brilliant, a big performance from him, even in True Romance, where he was Elvis. Tiny role, but a bigger, larger than life kind of hammy performance. And so, yes, he was cool, ice cool in a lot of movies. But I actually think sometimes it was those kind of wackier, more eccentric roles where we really saw how talented he was. The lengths he went to play Jim Morrison. I mean, he must have been devastated when it wasn't kind of rewarded with awards, because that's normally the kind of thing you get an Oscar for. But he really immersed himself in that role. That was a huge film. There were lots of other actors at that time trying to get that role. It was a really big deal to play Jim Morrison in that movie with Oliver Stone directing. So that is still a film that's talked about today when we discuss the greatest musical biopics. The Doors is often up there in the top 10 because I think it really captured the spirit of Jim Morrison. I think he knew that he was outspoken, which I suppose is something. There's lots of outspoken people who don't realize that. And that probably dampened his career a little bit. If you consider just how big a name he was in the 80s and 90s, and getting, the Batman role, leading man in The Saint, things like that. Not all of these huge successes, but even so, he was getting the leading man roles. And then what happened to his career, it does suggest that actually, he got a bit of a reputation. And certainly a director like John Frankenheimer, who directed him in The Island of Dr. Moreau with Marlon Brando. I mean, that's quite a handful to have Brando and Val Kilmer in the same movie. He said, I'm never working with Val Kilmer again. So I think when you have high profile directors kind of making those statements, unfortunately, that's gonna affect your career. So certainly the talent was there and the charisma was there. But yes, there were lots of stories about him being quite a tough character to work with. On a day like today, when we look back on his career and look back on the roles he did, there are things in there that you sort of forget he did. And there are things in there that seem so long ago. And you think, wow, Val Kilmer was doing leading roles that long ago. Because I grew up with him in things like True Romance and Heat, which was in the 90s, mid 90s. But he'd been going 10, 12 years prior to that as a leading man already. So he'd certainly been around a lot. And I think the fact that probably the most high profile thing we'd seen him in recently was in Top Gun Maverick, where he came back as Iceman. The fact that he was brought back for that, even though he couldn't speak anymore, shows just how much affection there was for him as an actor and as a character as well. Iceman's such a legendary character. So yes, there had been highs and lows, there had been rumors and stories and problems, but at the same time, he was seen as an integral part of the Top Gun legacy.